Hi out there, this is Stacy. And for those of you who have not heard me before or met me before, my name is Stacey Sanderson, and I am a psychotherapist and am sharing all things about not just narcissism, but about being a highly empathic or gifted or sensitive person. And my intention is to bring a more heart-centered, holistic way of understanding how to heal from toxic relationships, narcissistic wounding, narcissistic cycles, and even to a certain extent, intergenerational trauma connected to narcissism. So, with the idea there being to break a cycle. And with that segue, the last few posts I've been doing have been about narcissistic family systems. And we're going to continue with that thread today, taking a closer look at the various roles within a family system. And one of the roles that we hear the most about is that of the scapegoat. Now, you may ask yourself, why is it important to talk about and focus on narcissistic family systems? I think it's important because family systems are where narcissists can have the most impact. And those family system dynamics can be repeated in a number of different situations, workplaces, corporate cultures, volunteer organizations, community cultures, friend groups. It's a dynamic that repeats whenever a narcissist is in the center of any kind of human relationships. So hopefully that makes some sense. So part of my talk here is somewhat biased by the fact that I was in a scapegoat role. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. And the scapegoat is the container for what the narcissist does not like about themselves. So whether that's a father, a mother, other type of parent figure, I'm sensitive to the fact that there are all different variations and permeations of family systems, of family groups. So, I mean, you're going to hear me say mother, father, but this could equally be a stepmother, a stepfather, an adoptive parent, a guardian. It could easily be, and most likely be, a foster parent. So there's all kinds of different possibilities here. But being a scapegoat means that at a very early age, you start internalizing the fact that things are your fault or that you've done something wrong. So there is this strong internalization of blame. There are family systems where these roles are really tight and rigid, and there are ones where they're more fluid. It just depends. But the importance of this is understanding what boundaries you grew up with, and then what patterns went on to be repeated in your adult life. So, being the scapegoat comes also with a lot of internalized shame, right? So, you're going to hear me talking about blame and shame as I'm talking about narcissistic family systems, and that applies here. Right. The other piece of this is scapegoats tend to be the truth tellers within their families. And I'm going to say something that makes me a bit unpopular. I think scapegoats can also tend to be more bright, perhaps. They may have more natural gifts, and you might think that that's the golden child, and sometimes it is, but not always. I think scapegoats also are have a more anchored sense of justice, or at least they develop that over time. They will go on to repeat that schema of internalized blame in many different ways, right? So this inner narrative or inner script of it's my fault is one that they carry with them. We carry with us a long time, and it takes some hard work to to change that. So stay with me for a little longer in the talk, and I'll talk about some ways that you can change that role. If anyone has seen the movie Oppenheimer, I actually watched it twice last weekend because I thought I may have missed something the first time I watched it. But that's what you see in that movie is a very profound example of scapegoating, right? It is also an example of how scapegoats can be someone who makes their family system look really good to the outside world, but then they can be blamed within the four walls or however of their home, of their family home. So scapegoats tend to have a vulnerability to depression because of their inner negative schema and negative self-talk. They can have a vulnerability to anxiety because of this inner tendency to be fearful. So when I'm doing trauma work and specifically EMDR with clients who I believe have a scapegoat identity, what I know is going to emerge in their reprocessing work in terms of what they're carrying with them is they are fearful of being blamed or getting into trouble or people being angry with them. So on a relational level, we feel safe when we feel a sense of belonging. Scapegoats don't necessarily internalize that sense of belonging. And that's a second schema. So scapegoats will be fearful of not fitting in. I'm sorry, my cat's meowing in the background, of not being included, of being blamed, they can be fearful of being visible, right? They can be fearful of being targeted because they have this experience of being targeted. And underlying all of that fear is this sense that they're not safe because of that lack of belonging. So it has been my experience, both professionally and personally, that scapegoats carry a deep, deep, deep shame wound, a deep, deep belonging wound, and they struggle to find belonging. Scapegoats, I believe, are also more vulnerable to going into relationship with other narcissists. Not that they are, but they attract narcissists. Scapegoats, again, disagree with me if you like. I think scapegoats are more likely to have those more highly sensitive traits and more highly empathic traits. So they are more than likely to attract toxic people in their life. Because if you are someone wired to think that everything's your fault, of course, someone who's toxic or narcissistic is going to be drawn to you. How convenient for them, right? So I would say that this role is one that makes you more vulnerable to go out and repeat some of these patterns because there's unconsciously a comfort level with repeating what we know from what we grew up with. So there are positive elements to being in that role, and there are negative ones. You get to decide which ones work for you or don't, if this applies to you. Just a recap of that, I think scapegoats are more naturally sensitive and empathic and are truth tellers and have a very clear sense of justice. However, they also can hide their light under a bushel. They can be fearful of being in the limelight. They can have a bit of a chip on their shoulder. I know that's me. That's me for sure. They can at times battle with authority figures, which I didn't mention earlier. And if you can think of any other unique characteristics or anything that applies to you, I want to hear about it. We all want to hear about it, right? Put it in the comments. Join the conversation. So you get to decide, again, what parts of this role you want to keep, what attributes, what traits, and decide what's not working for you. And depending on how deeply entrenched this is, trauma work, reprocessing work, work where you are shifting that internal narrative can be immensely helpful. Additionally, finding other like-minded, sensitive, empathic souls can be immensely helpful. Building safety within other relationships can really move the needle in terms of that sense of belonging. But I think one of the most important platforms for healing is being anchored into your own self, your own experience, knowing what's important to you, and building a sense of self-esteem from that place. I believe that we as scapegoats came into these families as part of our soul's path. If that's not part of your belief system, just disregard what I just said. But this is where we get to evolve our soul esteem. And I hope go out and use those gifts in the world. So if you are interested in chatting with me, finding out more about me, there's a link in the channel to my website where you can get a hold of me. There's also a link to the Facebook group, Inquire Within, Finding and Nurturing Your True Self, which is where there is just some beautiful stuff being shared and a little bit more community and conversation. So if this resonates with you, please invite people you think would benefit from this, and subscribe and share and continue on building this community and connection. And thank you so much for listening.